The land had gone dry in his mouth before he even reached the creek. Dust lay on the air like ash from a long dead fire, and every step his horse took kicked up the bitter powder of a world that hadn't seen rain in weeks. Wind rolled over the scrubland with a whispering kind of menace, not loud, just constant, like it had nowhere else to go. Overhead the sky was the color of rusted tin, the sun beaten dull behind a gauze of high clouds. He'd been riding since before dawn, and the leather of his saddle groaned with wear each time he shifted his weight. His name was Jonah Beck, but there was no one left to call it out loud. The creek came into view just past a stretch of cottonwoods that hadn't dropped their leaves so much as let them rot on the branch. The water, thin, silvery, moved like it had somewhere to be, but not in any hurry. He pulled the horse to a slow stop and sat for a moment, not out of awe or habit, but simply because something didn't sit right in his gut. The hairs on his arms lifted. It wasn't the quiet. It was what was inside it. And then he saw them. 6 children. Still as deer at the edge of the water, though their clothes were not the sort made for hiding. A girl, the oldest, maybe 11 or 12, stood slightly ahead of the others, her jaw set like she knew what came next would not be kind. One boy, maybe 8, had a crooked stick in his hand but didn't raise it. The other 4 clustered in a loose pack behind her, mud on their hems, dust in their hair. No crying, no sound. Just watching. Jonah dismounted, slow hands where they could see them. He didn't ask who they were or what they were doing. He'd seen too many left behind in this part of the country to be surprised. Instead, he unslung his canteen and offered it to the girl. She didn't take it. "You all alone out here?" His voice rasped worse than he meant it to. She gave a single small nod. Her chin trembled once, but she caught it with her teeth. Behind her, one of the little ones, a boy no older than 4, sat down hard in the dirt and started rocking. The kind of rocking that comes when there's no words for the fear. Jonah crouched beside his horse and waited. A choice settled in him without fanfare. There were too many to leave. He could ride away, many would, but the weight of their eyes made something shift in his chest like an old door opening on rusted hinges. He led them to his camp 3 miles west. They didn't speak much. He didn't press. He gave them jerky, and the little ones chewed it like it was sacred. He made a fire small and smokeless, and let them curl near it as the wind picked up. He could feel the cold crawling in behind the dusk, and as night spread across the prairie, the youngest girl cried in her sleep. Jonah sat up with his rifle, watching the dark, wondering who or what had left them there. Later, as the stars wheeled above in their silent judgment, he noticed the eldest girl hadn't closed her eyes once. "You got a name?" he asked softly, not looking her way. She hesitated, then said, "Willa." He nodded, more to himself. She said nothing more, and he didn't expect her to. By morning, the boy with the stick had warmed to him just enough to ask for more food. Jonah gave him the last of the bread. He chewed it slow, watching Jonah like a pup, trying to decide if a hand would pet or hit. Jonah didn't ask about parents. Not yet. He knew loss when he saw it. It sat on them like a second skin. What he didn't know was what to do next. There were towns to the east, but none kind to strangers. Especially not strange men with silent children in tow. Folks whispered fast in places like that, made judgments faster than they offered help. He'd lived under that kind of talk before, and it didn't fade easy. So instead, he started building a shelter of sorts, using canvas rope and some half-rotten boards from an old fence line nearby. The boy with the stick helped. His name was Eli. He didn't like to be touched, but he'd fetch tools if you asked right. The others stayed close to the fire or to Willa. She braided their hair with dry hands and answered their questions in a voice meant to calm. Jonah watched her quietly. Something about the way she carried them reminded him of someone he didn't want to remember. Not yet. Jonah hadn't meant to stay. But days passed like cattle on the move, slow and full of dust, and leaving no longer felt like the simplest answer. Willa rose early each morning as if some old habit guided her. She helped him boil water ration what was left of the oats. She didn't smile, not even once, but there was a steadiness to her like fence posts dug deep. The children clung to her as if she'd always been more mother than sister. Jonah wondered if she even remembered what it felt like to be small. The land stretched wide around them, unbroken but for scattered rock and brush. In the mornings the air was sharp and silver cold, and the breath from the children's mouths floated like smoke. Jonah rode out once every few days, hunting what he could: prairie hen, jackrabbit, once a doe so lean it felt like sin to shoot her. But they were hungry. The children ate in silence every scrap. Eli followed him now, dog-like. The boy said little but watched everything. His stick became a kind of badge, his thin hand white-knuckling it like it held back some invisible threat. One evening, as they sat around the low fire, Willa finally spoke without being spoken to. "He left us there," she said. Her eyes were fixed on the flames, her voice low, flat. "Said he was coming back. Took the horse. Never did. Jonah didn't ask who. Didn't ask why. He only nodded slow, like the truth had already sat beside them all this time. That was 6 days ago," she added. "I counted." Jonah stirred the pot with the handle of his knife, the broth watery but hot. "Ain't your fault?" Willa blinked like maybe she hadn't heard him right, but she didn't say anything else. Later that night, when the little ones were asleep, he sat back against a stump and stared into the black beyond the firelight. The wind had died. Everything felt still in that uneasy kind of way. He thought about his brother, thought about the last time he'd seen him bare-knuckled and red-faced riding off with his own kind of finality, thought about the letter that had come 4 years too late, about the grave with no marker. Jonah was not a man built for children, and yet here they were. By the end of the week, the makeshift camp had the shape of something like home, if not the soul. The tent was patched with feed sacks. A few tools Jonah had carried with him since his ranch hand days had found new use in little hands. He watched Willa teach the youngest girl to sort kindling by size, watched Eli show the others how to tie knots like Jonah had taught him. He felt something crack in him, not break, just shift like ice beginning to melt. Willa asked one night, "What's your place like where you come from?" Jonah thought about the land he once owned, the barn his father built, the empty house he'd left behind after it all fell apart. "It's gone," he said. "Belonged to someone else now." She didn't pry. "Was it good?" she asked instead. He looked at her, surprised by the question. For a while, he said, Yeah. For a while." She nodded, and that was all. The next morning brought tracks. Cattle, first feral and ragged, passed by in the night. Then boot prints, too fresh. Jonah followed them out past the cottonwoods, where the creek thinned to nothing and the earth cracked underfoot. He knelt and laid his palm flat to the dirt. 3 men. No horses. That meant they were desperate. Or close. He went back fast, kept his voice even as he told Willa to gather the children and stay close. He loaded his rifle, checked the knife at his belt. The air had a new scent now, something sharp and foreign like sweat and old leather. Willa didn't ask, just moved like she'd been ready for this. Jonah felt it then, something stirring deep in him, something he thought had dried up long ago. Not fear. Responsibility. He had taken them in. Now he'd have to keep them. The journey continues long after this moment. Subscribe and ride on. They came just after sundown. Jonah heard them before he saw them, boots scuffing dry earth, the sound of metal clinking low and deliberate. Not the heavy thud of cowboys coming to talk, but the slow testing kind, like men trying to be quiet in a place that echoed everything. He told Willa to keep the children under the lean-to, gave her the pistol he kept in the bottom of his saddlebag. It was old, but it worked. She held it with both hands, jaw tight, like someone who'd never fired a gun but wouldn't hesitate if she had to. Jonah crouched behind the woodpile near the fire. No light, no sound, just the cold building up like water in a dam. Then a voice broke the still. "You there?" the man called. "Ain't looking for trouble. Just need a bit of food. Been walking a long way." Jonah stayed silent. Another voice chimed in, this one younger, meaner. "Come on out, friend. We saw your fire last night. You got a good little setup here. Wouldn't mind sharing in that comfort." He stepped out, then slow, deliberate, rifle loose in his arms, but ready. His shadow stretched long behind him. "Don't recall inviting company," he said. His voice was calm, but it scraped through the dark like flint on steel. "3 of them. One older, bearded, scar under his eye. One with a coat too fine for the road. The third barely more than a boy, but already full of bad thoughts. The kind that came from hunger and pride mixing together too long." The older one smiled, yellow-toothed. "Didn't mean offense. Just figured there's enough to go around." "There ain't," Jonah said. "You keep walking." The young one stepped forward. "You got kids back there." "So?" "That your family?" Jonah didn't blink. "They are now." The wind kicked up behind him, tugging at the canvas, making the fire gutter low. The children stayed quiet, just as they'd been told. Willa didn't move. He could feel her behind him, still as stone. "You don't want to do this," Jonah said. "Not tonight. But men who have nothing don't listen to warnings." The boy moved first, fast and stupid, reached for something under his coat. Jonah fired. The crack split the night open. The boy spun, hit the dirt, didn't move. The other 2 flinched, but didn't run. "Not yet." "Next one's not a warning," Jonah said. The older man stared at the body, jaw twitching. Then after a beat, he grabbed the second by the arm and pulled him back. "Not worth it," he muttered. "Come on." They disappeared into the dark like smoke curling away from flame. Jonah stood there a long time, rifle still raised. When the silence settled again, he turned back. Willa had not moved. Her eyes were wet, but her grip on the pistol hadn't loosened. "Is he dead?" she asked. Jonah didn't answer. Just took the gun from her hands and walked out to where the boy lay. He was maybe 16, maybe less. Hadn't shaved yet. The bullet had taken him clean. Jonah said nothing, dug a shallow grave by lamplight far from the camp. The other men did not return. By morning it was like none of it had happened. Except it had. Willa brought him coffee she'd boiled in the tin pot, hand shaking slightly. "You didn't have to stay," she said. He looked up at her. "Neither did you." That day the air warmed just enough to feel like spring might come. The children played in the dust with twine and sticks, building cities no one would ever visit. Eli stood watch like Jonah had taught him, his stick now whittled at the tip sharper. Jonah repaired the shelter's roof. Willa sat nearby, sewing patches into a quilt from what cloth they had. Her hands moved with practiced care, but now and then she'd glance up at him. That night he told her about the ranch, how it had failed, how his brother had lost the land gambling and blamed him, how his wife, brief as that marriage was, had gone east and never wrote back, how he had drifted for near 6 years chasing nothing. "I wasn't good to hold on to," he said. Willa didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "Maybe you are now." He stared into the fire, the way it curled and breathed like something alive. He didn't say thank you, didn't say anything. But the next morning he built a second lean-to, bigger, stronger, for her and the children. And Willa helped with steady hands and a quiet kind of hope neither of them dared name. A week later the sky finally broke. Not with thunder or spectacle, just a slow, steady rain that soaked into the ground like it had been waiting its whole life to do so. The children stood in it, barefoot, heads tilted back, arms outstretched. Eli grinned without meaning to, blinking water from his eyes. The littlest one, May, barely walking, stumbled in circles and laughed until she fell. Willa didn't run out like the others. She stood under the lean-to, arms crossed, watching the sky with something unreadable in her face. Jonah came up beside her, water beading on his hat and dripping from his coat. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. They'd made it this far. Later they sat on the porch of the half-framed cabin he'd started 2 days before. Nothing more than floorboards and a few upright beams now, but it was enough to picture something solid, something lasting, the kind of thing he'd once sworn off. Willa passed him a bowl of stew, thin but warm. She sat beside him, both of them looking out across the clearing. The fire behind them cracked. The children's voices rose and fell in the dusk. "I used to think," she said slowly, "that if I just kept everything moving it wouldn't catch up to me. The fear, the truth, all of it." He looked over at her. She didn't meet his eyes. "But it does," she added. "Even out here." Jonah nodded. "It does. But it don't get to win." They were quiet for a while. Then she said, "We can't live like this forever." "I know. There's towns west of here, bigger ones. Could maybe find real work. School for the kids." "They won't want me in any of those towns," he said. "Maybe not," she replied. "But they don't know what you've done for us." Jonah didn't speak. He thought about the boy he'd buried, the men who'd turned away. He thought about his own name, how it still felt sour in his mouth most days. But he also thought about Ellie building fences, about Maya's laugh, about Willa stitching worn cloth into something new. "You'd go with me?" he asked. Willa looked at him then. "Really, look." "We already did," she said. That night he brought out a small tin box from his pack. Inside it was a locket, dented but whole. He'd carried it for years without reason. It had belonged to his mother. He hadn't looked at it since the fire. He placed it in Willa's hands. "I ain't got much," he said, voice low, "but I can give what I've got." She opened it. Inside there was no picture, just a pressed wildflower, dry and crumbling with age. Willa closed it gently. "Then we'll start from there." Jonah built the cabin wall by wall. Willa taught the children to read from a Bible missing its cover. Eli started setting snares. May learned to walk without stumbling. They planted when the ground thawed. Barley, beans, anything they could coax from the earth. The road remained long and unwatched, but it didn't scare them anymore. One morning, months later, Jonah stood beside the house with a hammer in his hand and watched the sun rise. Willa came to stand next to him, her shawl wrapped tight, hair braided back. "What do you see?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Then enough." She smiled, small and real. He reached for her hand. She let him take it. Far off the sound of hooves echoed faintly. A traveler, maybe, maybe not. But Jonah didn't turn to look. He had work to do. By midsummer, the cabin stood solid and square against the wind. The walls, though rough, held firm. Jonah had used salvaged boards, river stones, and whatever nails he could spare. The roof leaked in 2 corners when it rained, but it didn't matter. It was theirs. A clothesline stretched from the porch post to an old cottonwood, strips of sun-bleached fabric fluttering in the breeze like flags of quiet victory. Chickens scratched around the yard, now 3 hens, one mean-eyed rooster traded from a trapper who'd lost his wife and didn't want company. The children had names for each bird. Willa had names for the herbs growing in her window boxes. Life didn't feel easy, but it no longer felt borrowed. Jonah walked the perimeter each morning with Eli, showing him how to track foxes by the way grass bent. The boy no longer flinched at shadows. He asked questions now, carried a small knife at his hip, whittled his own walking stick. Willa sewed him a vest from scraps, and Eli wore it like armor. Sometimes Willa would pause in her chores and just stand in the doorway watching them. She never said it out loud, but Jonah could feel it in the way her shoulders loosened when they returned each time, her quiet way of counting blessings. She'd changed too. Not softened, she had never been soft, but opened. He caught her humming once while stirring a pot. She touched the children's hair now and then, gentle and slow. She'd even laughed one evening when Jonah tripped over a bucket in the dark and cursed so colorfully the kids nearly fainted. There was still weight in her, yes. Still that edge of grief that hadn't worn away. But Jonah had learned not to fear it. Grief was part of the land, like drought and dust. You didn't escape it, you just learned to plant around it. Then came the letter. A rider passed through late one afternoon. Tall, red-faced, his horse gaunt from distance. He said there was a message for a Willa Ashford name posted in a shop window in a town 2 days' ride west. Willa took the folded paper with both hands, held it to her chest a moment before opening it. Jonah waited nearby, quiet. She read it twice. Her fingers trembled, then stilled. "It's my uncle," she said at last. "Says he heard what happened. Wants me to come east. Says there's room for us." Jonah didn't speak. She folded the letter again, slow and careful. "He's a banker. Lives in St. Joseph. We'd have a roof, school, a life." He still didn't speak. Just watched her. "I need to think," she said. That night neither of them slept much. The children did, curled and warm under the patched quilt. But Willa sat near the hearth watching the fire burn low, her hands folded in her lap. Jonah fixed coffee before dawn. She joined him on the porch, wrapped in his coat. "I thought about what I want," she said. He looked at her. The early light touched her face like it belonged there. And he asked. "I want to stay," she said. "But not just because I'm afraid of leaving." Jonah's chest went tight. "I want something that's ours. Something we made, not something handed down with rules attached." He exhaled slow, like something in him had been waiting to be released. "There's no guarantees here," he said. "No safe bets." She nodded. "There's no safe bets anywhere." He reached for her hand, not gently but with purpose. She took it. Later that week they rode into the nearest town together, quiet but proud, side by side. Jonah bought nails and flour. Willa bought ribbon and thread. Eli traded 2 rabbits for a tin whistle and played it off-key the whole ride home. And when they returned, the porch held a pair of rocking chairs. The new life didn't arrive all at once. It came in pieces, in fence rails and bread loaves, in children's laughter and the smell of lavender drying in bunches above the hearth. In the way Jonah took off his hat each time he stepped inside. In the way Willa rested her hand on his back when he leaned over the stove. Nothing was promised, but what they had they chose, day after day. Together. The harvest came lean, but it came. Barley stood in thin gold rows behind the cabin, picked by hand and stored in sacks stacked neatly against the back wall. Willa taught the children how to separate grain from chaff, how to be patient with the process. "Don't rush it," she said. "It all matters." Jonah caught her saying that more than once, not just about grain. The little ones grew fast. Meg could speak in full sentences now, bossy and bright. She followed Jonah like a second shadow, asking endless questions. He answered most of them, though sometimes all he could offer was a shrug and a tired smile. Eli built a fence on his own. Jonah watched from the porch, said nothing as the boy measured with twine, hammered with crooked hands, straightened the posts when they leaned. He didn't praise him when it was done. He just said, "Let's paint it," and handed over the brush. Willa had a journal now, pages stitched together with twine and bound with stiff cloth. She didn't share what she wrote. But some nights Jonah would see her sitting by the firehead, bent lips moving without sound, like she was putting old ghosts to rest in ink and letting them stay there. It had been almost a year since the creek. Jonah still remembered that day like it lived behind his eyes. They never talked about it, not in full. But once when they were stacking firewood together, Willa said, "I think he thought he was doing the right thing, leaving us, like it'd give us a better chance." Jonah grunted. He was wrong. "I know," she said, "but sometimes I wonder if he meant to come back, if something just stopped him." Jonah didn't answer. He understood that kind of wondering. He'd lived inside it himself once. But he also knew some men don't come back because they're too ashamed to try. Winter came sooner than expected. The wind turned sharp and mean. The trees bent low, their branches coated in brittle frost. The world quieted, wrapped in white. Jonah chopped wood each morning, hands cracked, breath fogging the air. Willa made thick soups and sewed blankets from whatever fabric they could spare. They weathered the storms. The roof held. The food lasted. Christmas came with no tree, but the children woke to small gifts, wooden animals Jonah had carved, scarves Willa had sewn. Nothing grand, but they squealed and clutched them like treasure. That night, after the children were asleep, Jonah and Willa stood by the fire, cups of cider in hand. She leaned against him. He didn't move. "You ever think about leaving?" she asked. "I used to," he said. "Now I don't." "Why?" He looked down at her. "Because I ain't lost anymore." They stayed like that for a long time. No words. Just the warmth of the fire and each other. In spring, Willa found out she was pregnant. She told him by placing his hand on her belly one morning before he'd even had his coffee. Jonah went still. His fingers shook. She smiled. "You're not afraid?" He swallowed. "I'm terrified." Her smile widened. "Good," she said. "Me too." They built a cradle from cedar. Let the children help sand it smooth. The baby came in late August during the kind of heat that made the sky hum. A girl, red-faced and fierce, lungs strong. Willa named her June. Jonah held her like she was made of fire and breath. "She looks like you," Willa whispered. He didn't believe her, but he wanted to. At night, when the baby cried, Jonah rose first, walked the cabin floor with her against his shoulder, humming low, tuneless sounds that seemed to calm them both. The world had not gotten easier. The land still asked too much, but now it gave back. In time, people from nearby homesteads started stopping by. A woman needing help with a roof. A boy looking for work. They came, and Jonah didn't turn them away. He had food. He had shelter. He had Willa. When someone asked him once if they were married, he looked at Willa. She raised a brow, half smiling. "Not yet," she said. That spring he built a bench beneath the cottonwood near the creek, carved their names into it with a dull knife, sat there with her as the sun went down, June sleeping between them and the older children racing sticks in the water below. The wind blew soft. The grass swayed. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They'd already said everything that mattered. If you believe no soul is beyond redemption, subscribe and keep walking this road.